against it. Tomorrow, surprise yourself, just believe it. Tomorrow never comes. I said tonight, I'm living in the forest of a dream. I know the light is not as it would seem. I must be losing something, so I'll make myself believe it. This night will never go.
What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Imperial Diecast. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 1/18 scale Ferrari 288 GTO by Bburago. I mean, this is a true legend, because what you're looking at here was the first of what came to be known as the Ferrari Five. 5 Ferrari flagships, consisting of this 288 GTO, the F40, the F50, the Enzo Ferrari, and the LaFerrari. And maybe by the time you're watching this, it'll be the Ferrari 6, because the LaFerrari will have had a successor, but as of the making of this video, it's not yet the case. Now, the actual name of this car is simply Ferrari GTO, but to be able to differentiate between not just the older 250 GTO, but also the newer 599 GTO, car enthusiasts have decided to call this the 288 GTO, and I think it is a fitting name. GTO, of course, meaning Gran Turismo Omologato. Homologation in the automotive industry is the process of getting the approval of an official organization with authority that whatever you are building is worthy for something. In this case, being a race car that was allowed to participate in the legendary FIA Group B class back in the day, which required 200 models to be built. In the end, Ferrari ended up building 272 GTOs, but Group B got banned due to several crashes that made the FIA realize it was too dangerous. But since more than 200 GTOs had already been made, they still hit the market in 1984. Although I wouldn't call this 80s design, because it is based on the visually quite similar-looking 308, which came out 9 years earlier in 1975, and a car that some of y'all might know from Magnum PI. In the automotive world, a decade was an extremely long time, and a ton of stuff could have changed in a decade. Things that were considered groundbreaking would be old and outdated 10 years later. And that principle holds true even in today's world of cars. I mean, when the Ford Mustang launched in the mid-1960s, it created an arms race of muscle cars that, by the mid-70s, was largely over, also thanks to the fuel crisis. All in the span of 10 years. So to me, saying the design of the 288 GTO was from as early as the mid-70s makes this so much more of an interesting and awesome car than to pretend it was born in the mid-80s. And of course, it's also very similar to the successor of the 308, the 328. And believe it or not, but this much beefier looking 288 GTO is actually 300 kilograms lighter than the small and lean 308 it was based on. So again, this model is just a Bburago, and there are also some other models of the 288 GTO available, the most recent of which being the release by KK scale, which is in the price range of €70 retail. There's of course also a GT Spirit version, which looks very similar to the KK scale, perhaps the only difference being that the hood vents are perforated and there are black-painted prancing horses on the center locks of the wheels. And both of them are sealed models, nothing opens on them, So if you want a opening 288 GTO, your options are either the Bburago, or the Hot Wheels, or the Hot Wheels Elite. The Hot Wheels and the Hot Wheels Elite are today completely overpriced. I mean, they were affordable when they were being made about 10 years ago, but today, trying to get one is just not a good idea because they're so expensive. And what makes it even more expensive and less worth the money, in my opinion, is that the Hot Wheels and the Hot Wheels Elite 288 GTOs are based on this exact Bburago mold. I'm pretty sure Hot Wheels did not create their own casting for the 288 GTO. What they did was they took the Bburago casting, they changed the wheels, they gave it a proper paint job, like an accurate one, and of course they added a couple of extra details like better taillights and fabric seatbelts and so on. So I decided to do exactly that with this model. And these are the paints that I used for this project. Basically paints left over from my days of collecting tabletop wargaming figures. They're acrylic paints from a company called Citadel, which makes these for Games Workshop. So basically I needed black, silver, red, and yellow for all the improvements. This is a €15 Bburago that I got without box from a secondhand seller. And I spent the last week or so painting this to make it look like the actual 288 GTO. Because the baseline Bburago looks like this, and it looks horribly inaccurate. So that's the reason why a lot of model car collectors avoid the basic Bburago. However, not all of them know that even the more expensive Hot Wheels versions is based on this exact same Bburago, just painted better and has more details. So if you have the patience and the time to improve this model, this is what you will get. So in this review, I want to show you all the things that I did to this model, and we're going to start from the front. So taking a look at the front of the Ferrari 288 GTO, probably the biggest difference to the 308 that it is based on is that the 288 GTO has a much more aggressive looking front grille, as well as 4 fog lamps. The actual headlights are these pop-up headlamps at the top, and they of course do not open on this Bburago, but they also do not open on the Hot Wheels, or even on the Hot Wheels Elite for that matter. However, Hot Wheels Elite released a Ferrari 308 with working pop-up headlamps. Apart from those 2 pop-up headlamps, you can also see that we have this black bar in the middle, and this bar has 2 fog lamps in the center, right and left, and then at the edges it has the orange indicators. So the first thing I did was I painted these in silver and in orange respectively. Further below, we have the main front grille, and you can see that this grille is actually perforated, as was customary on 1980s Bburagos. The Ferrari prancing horse is a separate 3-dimensional chrome piece. And of course we have the 4 big fog lamps on either side. And kudos to Bburago for not putting black pegs in the middle of them, like they did with the Testarossa's fog lamps. So these actually look really good. Even further below, we have 5 small air vents, and these were body colored, although they did have grooves. So what I basically did was I painted them black to make them look like actual vents. So overall, lots of details on the front. And now if we move further up, you can see that we have the Ferrari logo. It is just a sticker, and Bburago had provided a small indentation on the car body where the sticker would go. Oftentimes on these 1980s Bburagos, the Ferrari sticker would not be placed very accurately, but here it is pretty well placed, I'd say. Now if you take a look at these vents here, these were all body colored when I bought the Bburago. However, what I did was I simply painted them in black with like a really thinned down watery black paint, and then I took a dry cloth and I wiped the top of these air vents or these louvers, I should say, so that the red paint became visible again. So that way I create the illusion of there being actual air intakes here, like vents, even though there aren't any. Some people decide not to put so much emphasis on this part, but I thought, why not? And just like that, I also painted the black lines around the pop-up headlamps to make it look like as if it'll open. One flaw that some of these Bburago 288 GTOs have is that there's a little gap here between the front lip and the actual metal body of the car, which unfortunately you cannot close. It's not flexible or anything. But if you are okay with that, I mean, it doesn't really show up, then I'd say this is a pretty good casting. Now let's start with the front of this car, because the front trunk can actually be opened, and it opens up like this, which is pretty damn amazing. Now you can see that this is where I did more improvements to the car. So if I can just put this over here. The first thing that I did was I painted the interior of this panel in black, because 1980s Buragos suffered from notorious underspray on the interior panels of the paintwork. But on the real car, this is painted black, so that was what I did. And now if we take a look at the interior of this front trunk, you can see that we have a spare wheel, and we also have several canisters here, which I have painted in white, along with some cables that I painted in the same color that it is on the real 288 GTO's interior, which is like a kind of brown. I believe these are the canisters for the windshield wiper fluid, and this one is the battery, I think. And then we also have a little hose here. Let's see right there. And then we have two radiators over here. And this might explain the purpose of this air vent here. So the purpose of this central vent is that while the car is moving, the air that gets sucked in through the front grille goes through the radiators and then out of these vents to create downforce for the front of the car, which would otherwise be lighter than the back where the engine is. So here's a look at the side profile of the Ferrari 288 GTO, and it really does look like a race car, doesn't it? It's just very angular and really nicely shaped. This is where you will notice the majority of the improvements that I made to the outside of the vehicle. Starting with the front, I painted the A-pillars as well as the frame of the windshield in black. And moving along the canopy, I also painted the B-pillar and the window surrounds as well. And of course, the iconic body length black pinstripe that runs from the front of the car's side along the entire length of the car all the way to the back. Bburago actually provided a really nice groove for this pinstripe, but they never actually painted it. And this is a flaw that you would find on other Bburago Ferraris from the mid-80s and early 90s as well, including the F40 and the F50. My reasoning as to why they did not include these details is that back in the day, the way Bburago would assemble their model cars was piece by piece, and every piece could be a different color, but they were somehow unable to add more than one color on a single piece. So, for example, they could assemble a model car with beige plastic seats, chrome engine and exhausts, black perforated plastic mesh, and the metal body. But they could only paint each of these pieces in a single color. This was probably what prevented them from adding orange indicators, or the aforementioned black pinstripe, as well as the A and B pillar detailing in the required black color. Thankfully, Bburago has improved in this area nowadays, as they use a different assembly and painting process that allows them to add multiple colors on the car body. But of course, the modern Buragos don't have nearly as many separate pieces as the 1980s Buragos did. So apart from the black pinstripe, you can also see that I painted the keylock in black, and the door handle as well. And next to the door handle we have this cone-shaped air vent, and I painted this in black as well to simulate a hole. And the gas cap trim was also painted in black. So the only things that you do get with the stock Bburago are the Scuderia shield, which is a sticker, and the Pininfarina sticker as well. I also painted these triple vents here in black to simulate actual vents. And these triple vents are actually a tribute to the 1962 250 GTO. Now let's take a closer look at the wheels, and they have 16-inch rims on them. The wheels are also not a strong point of the 288 GTO by Bburago, because they used to have like black and visible pins for the wheel axle. So Bburago had forgotten to provide the actual center locks. So what I did was I simply painted the pins in silver to kind of make it feel like that they're there. Of course, what I could have also done was mold a separate center lock covering on top of this gap here, but that would have been a little extra work. Some other people have tried to swap these wheels with ones from the F40, which is also a good idea. Cool thing though on these tire walls, as you can see, we have the Bburago and the 280/45 VR415 tire size branding. Here's a look at the rear wheels. And right up there you can see the lip spoiler. And here's the back of the Ferrari 288 GTO. Not my favorite angle of the car because I feel like the taillights just aren't that interesting. However, you can see that I did paint the center parts of this taillight in silver, and then I painted the inner taillights in red because they are separate colored. What I also did was, if you look at this GTO badge here, I painted the prancing horse in black because it was completely chrome, but on the real GTO it is a black Cavallino Rampante. And what I also did was I painted the interior of these three GTO letters in black because Bburago had actually provided the grooves for this chrome piece, which would allow a black color to go into them while still maintaining the edges of the letters in chrome. That is a remarkable amount of detail that would have gotten lost if it wasn't painted properly. And so I did that, and now I think it just looks absolutely amazing. We then have a pre-EU Italian license plate. This is from Modena, I think, 856. And further down we have a whole series of rear vents. And we have quad exhausts that are chrome tipped. And you can also see the transmission. So all these details Bburago has provided. They just look a lot better when they're painted. Now as we move on further up, we come to the rear engine bay cover. And here the improvement that I made was, you can see that we have a chrome Ferrari badge. And it's just one chrome piece, but it does have some depth. So what I did was I added some black paint in between the letters to make them stand out more. And I think now Ferrari is more readable than it would have been without that shading. One flaw that this car has was that there is a paint bubble here, which I can't get rid of, so that kind of sucks. But what I like about this Bburago is, first of all, you can see that all these vents here are perforated, so you can actually see into the engine from them. Kind of like on the same way as on the KK scale. But the difference here is that this entire rear engine bay lid can be opened. And Bburago has provided us with these two pins here. Now, of course, they are bigger on this model than they would be in real life in terms of proportions. But that's okay because they're meant to be big enough so that you can actually use them. So what I do was I grab them like this, and then I can actually get this entire engine bay opened. Now, before we take a look at the engine, I just wanted to show you another problem that I had with this model, and that is that I completely messed up sticking this B-pillar flying buttress here. What happened was that the Bburago casting's roof panel is made out of plastic and is therefore not seamless with the rest of the metal body. So there's a seam here, and on some models this can actually pop up a little bit, which means that the seam will not be perfect. And I thought it was a good idea to just use some super glue. And so put some super glue here and then press it back down. So that's what I did here, but then the super glue just spilled over and I couldn't get it out fast enough, and it caused a lot of white blotches. So the only way I could repair that was by painting it with a red tone that is similar enough to this Ferrari's. And I guess from a distance you can't really tell it. I've done that, but of course in the proper light conditions and all that, it looks pretty horrible. So the lesson that I learned is, the next time I want to stick a seam, what I should do is, I should take some sellotape and then put like one here, and then another here, and then stick it so that any excess glue will then land on the tape, which I can then peel off and protect the actual panels of the car. But now let's check the engine bay. So the engine bay cover, or the back of it, is actually supposed to be painted black, which is also something that I did. So now it looks more like the real engine bay cover. And now if we take a look at the engine, you can see that Bburago put a lot of details into this engine. First of all, it has an amazing level of depth. And not only that, but while I was painting this car and I had taken it apart, you could actually see that Bburago had molded the entire engine, which is super, super awesome. That is something they just do not do anymore. This is the kind of detail you might expect on a CMC model, but certainly not from a budget diecaster, but it just goes to show the length of detail which Bburago in the 1980s used to put. But most of it, of course, remains invisible because these panels block the view into the engine. So you can see a little bit from perhaps the wheel arches and from underneath. But otherwise, it's just this top view here. And the 288 GTO's engine produces 395 brake horsepower. It's a twin-turbo 2.8-liter V8, hence 288 before the GTO. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour is achievable in 5 seconds, and the car has a top speed of 305 kilometers per hour. If I'm not mistaken, this was actually the first road-going car to breach the 300 kph barrier in 1984. And then we have these intercoolers from a Swiss company called Behr, that is B-E-H-R. So these are the intercoolers that cool the air that comes from the turbochargers and before it goes into the engine. You'll also notice that the engine is mounted in a longitudinal way instead of a transversal way like on the 308. And the 308 was not turbocharged, but the 288 GTO is. So this is the kind of stuff that you cannot see on the KK scale or the GT Spirit version of the 288 GTO, because no opening parts. You can still see into the interior with them, but not the engine. So that's one of the reasons why I went for the Bburago. Also the awesome way how the engine cover opens. And now let's take a look at the interior. This door does not close 100% properly, but I did manage to fix it. When I had bought the car, it was pretty hard to open. And then when I would push it back, it would just only close about this much. Then when I open it again and push it back again, it would only close this much. It was really crazy. So what I did was I took the car apart, and then I added some oil, like just normal kitchen oil, into the hinge of the door, and that allowed the door to close properly again. So anyway, I'm gonna now open these doors up and show you the interior of the 288 GTO. And the interior is where I actually spent most of the time of my improvements and put a lot of work into, because the entire interior had to be redone. I mean, here you can see what the interior of the Bburago 288 GTO originally looked like. It was completely different. It was wrong, simply wrong in terms of paint, because Bburago had for some reason decided to give it a bright interior, like with beige seats and with grey plastic footwells and everything, as well as the dash. So I had to black out the entire dash. And while doing so, I also got an opportunity to highlight some of the details Bburago had added on the dashboard. For example, these vents here, which I painted in chrome, or like in silver. And then also these center air vents here, which actually had little prancing horses, little three-dimensional ones, that I painted in silver. So now they look pretty cool. But then if you look at the rest of the dashboard here, you can see that Bburago had provided us with a three-dimensional GTO badge. And so, again, I used that black color trick to get some of the black inside the letterings to give it that real GTO feel. And this panel here, of course, had to be painted in red to contrast the dash. And the rest of the interior also had to be painted in black. But perhaps the most difficult part was to get these seats done properly, because this red seat cushion was actually an option on the GTO. There were also Ferrari GTOs that were completely just black seats, but I decided to go for the option, and it took a lot of time to paint every single one of these cushions in red. And then I also painted the seatbelt latches in red, and you can see that Bburago has provided us with the seatbelts here. And then I also painted the center of the belt buckles in black. And then if you look at the center console here, you can see that Bburago actually provided us with all the switches. So all of those little dials and buttons were there. And they were in chrome, and I basically had to just put some black wash there to give them that feel of depth. But yeah, I mean, you can also see another prancing horse back there. And of course the stick shift is a 5-speed dogleg manual. And we also have a handbrake right here. And the center console up there has little stickers with the oil temperature and other little dials, and they have red gauges, which is pretty cool, like on the real GTO. So getting all those details right, or the knobs for the radio that I painted in silver, was not an easy task, but I think that the effort paid off, and it just looks absolutely amazing now. You can also see that the door panel over there had some details on it, but I had to paint everything in black. And there's also like an audio system, like speakers, door handle and everything. There's also a little compartment there to put your stuff. So this is actually an older Ferrari than the F40, but it just had more creature comforts than the absolutely bare bones Ferrari F40. So now let's take a look at the driver's side. And as we do, you'll notice that some of these older Bburagos had like the problem that the Ferrari prancing horses on the steering wheels were stickers that were often mounted upside down, or sideways sometimes, and this is a problem that a lot of the 1980s Bburago Ferraris used to have. I tried to get this off, but the sticker was really hard to remove, and I didn't want to like completely destroy it and replace it with something that I would have to use from my printer, so I decided to keep it on. But if you look behind the steering wheel, you can see that the speedometer and the rev meter are also these red gauges. They're just stickers, but it's still pretty interesting that the Ferrari GTO had that sort of color combination. The front steering, of course, works excellently. Very smooth for a model that is almost 35 years old now. Shift pedals have been painted in silver by me, although they were gray. I could have left them gray, but I decided to just paint them silver. There are also some floor mats, which are kind of hard to see. I think you can see them now. And they have a little bit of a three-dimensional texture on them. So Bburago did provide the details, but the details really become amazing if you paint them properly. And that was something that Bburago had not done, and I had to do myself. But I think that the trouble was worth it. It's not perfect, but still, it's really nice. And now the interior looks like that of a real Ferrari GTO. So there you have it, folks. This is a €15 Bburago instead of a hundreds and hundreds of euro expensive Hot Wheels or Hot Wheels Elite model. And it's a fully opening one, unlike the KK Scale and the GT Spirit ones. So you get all these extra details, and all you need to do is to just spend a couple of afternoons painting it to make it look great. And you'll have an excellent 288 GTO in your collection. And finally, taking a look at the bottom of the Ferrari 288 GTO, you can see that it says Bburago Ferrari GTO 1984, made in Italy, Scala 118. And what's so amazing about these older Bburagos is that you could just see how much detail they packed into the engine and the transmission, because the entire thing is visible from down here. You can also see that Bburago actually took the trouble to color the bottom of the car properly, because they use these black plastic here. And that's exactly how it looks like on the real GTO, and these vents here are perforated. And the exhaust system is connected to the engine. Just everything is visible here. The rear differential, the gearbox, transmission, and everything. It's just absolutely great. And that's the kind of quality you would get from a supposed budget model of the past. Really cool. Alright guys, thank you so much for tuning in and checking out my review of the 118 scale Ferrari 288 GTO by Bburago. Probably the second most famous Ferrari of the 1980s, because it was kind of overshadowed by the Testarossa that came out in the same year as well, the 1984 model year. Still, an amazing legend of a car. So, if you're interested in the review of the Testarossa, please do watch it right here, or perhaps some of the other vintage Ferraris. Take care, have a wonderful day. This is Imperial Diecast, signing out.